Hey, I'm Cedric Chambers, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of the 3D Podcast, a masterclass where we share with you everything you need to know about how to transform diversity and inclusion in your organization as well as in your community. We're on a mission to amplify the voices of leaders that are making an impact in the world today so that we can have a better tomorrow. Our goal every episode is to keep it simple, honest, and transparent with you by uncovering the truths in diversity and inclusion with the hope of creating behavioral change, all while presenting it from a unique perspective. So look, if you're ready, get your notepad out, pour you a drink, and let's dive deep as we discuss the dimensions of diversity. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of 3D Podcast where we speak with real practitioners that are making real change in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. I'm excited for our show today as we are speaking to Heather Holland, an innovative global human resources and business consultant. Heather founded and operates Holland Energy Consulting under the guiding principle, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Heather consults with corporations and business owners implementing the firm's mission to help businesses solve their most complex people and HR matters. She is a trusted advisor with over 15 years of experience delivering diverse people, organizational, and business solutions while strategically partnering to create healthy workplace cultures where individuals, teams, and organizations can prosper and flourish. Look, so without further ado, I'm excited. I hope you're excited. Let's hop into this discussion with Heather Holland. So Heather, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you, Cedric?
Oh, I'm blessed and highly favored. I can't complain. I'm excited to have this discussion today. And so, so that our audience can just get some foundation information, get to know a little bit more about you. Can you share just a little bit about your background, kind of how you got into the D&I space, kind of your career journey? And I would love if you, as you're going through that background, your background, if you could just share a few points and lessons learned as you matriculated through your career.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And first, thank you for having me. I am happy to be here. One of the
No
things that
problem.
I love doing is kind of sharing knowledge and wisdom and just sharing the benefits of what I've learned. I feel like I've been in some unique spaces, more of which I'll share in a sec. So my name is Heather Holland. I am the founder, the chief diversity consultant, and global diversity and inclusion and HR leader with Holland Energy Consulting. And prior to starting my consulting firm, actually, I worked in corporate America. I have a master's in human resources and labor relations. So that's what got me in that space of D&I. And early in my career, I started out in manufacturing. So specifically steel, like steel manufacturing, foundries, hot, dusty, dirty environments. And a lot of times the only diversity you see there is on the plant floor. And then I moved into like transportation, manufacturing, and made parts for the railroad industry. Did a little stint at a Job Corps facility, which is like a youth education industry, youth employment and training. And then I moved into energy. So energy, don't think about your local utility. That's a separate field of energy. So energy, natural gas and oil pipelines, power generation, some renewables around wind. And one thing when it comes to diversity and energy is probably, if not the diverse, is one of the least diverse industries. It is less diverse than tech. So laying out those industries and the path where I've always been one of fill in the blank. Only woman, only Black woman, youngest, etc. And so in manufacturing, where my interest started in diversity and inclusion, was just I wanted to see more diversity. I wanted to see more Black people. I wanted to see less of that sort of class system and on a plant floor, and moving from the plant floor up into leadership ranks. So my interest was because it was personal, because it was asked to say, how do we change this? Sometimes, a lot of times, I just saw a need and took the bull by the horns. And so kind of jumping back to my career. So more recently, I probably spent the last 12 or so years in energy, and kind of some organizational structural changes came about. I was laid off, and then I decided to start my own consulting firm. And so it wasn't something that I always wanted to do, but it was a time of opportunity because I had gained so much experience and started a diversity and inclusion program in energy at my former employer, which was TC Energy. I figured I'd capitalize on why not do it now? Because if you don't sort of branch out on your own, you'll never know. And
Yeah.
you can always go back and forth. And so that consulting, Holland Energy has leveraged my industry experience in energy, but also playing with the energy, the intellectual capital that we expand that it takes to work in diversity and inclusion, or being kind of from a diverse background in a corporate environment. It all takes some level of energy. And that's where my career trajectory has sort of brought me and taken me to those places, so that I think the formal as well as the informal experiences, and just also wanting and needing and seeing a change that needed to take place, diversity and inclusion has always become, or has had become, a very strong interest and passion.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I do have a question on your background. And so you spoke a little bit about the energy industry, and you said that it's more least diverse than tech. And so my
Yes.
question is, why do you think that's the case?
Well, that is a great question. I think one question that is still being answered, but digging in. But I think a lot of it, I think one thing that those industries have in common, when you think about manufacturing energy, it is a commodity that everyone needs, US and globally, and that may not always be at the forefront. Energy different from a utility. You know who your utility provider is because you pay your light bill every month. But how does your utility get the energy to you? Most people have no idea. So those are companies, they're not B2B. I mean, they're not B2C where you're selling to a consumer, business selling to consumer. It's B2B where they're selling to other businesses. So you may have heard of a Shell, but who is the pipeline company that supplies Shell that gas of oil? The average person has never heard of them. And it's an industry similar to manufacturing that is very long-standing, industrial, close to nature. So a lot of times too, especially in when I first got involved in energy, a lot of people came to the industry by word of mouth because their father worked there, their grandfather worked on the offshore oil rig. Another reason why it may not be so diverse, a lot of, I mean, if you're not in the industry, you don't know about it. When I first got into energy, I didn't know anything about it. And I think the industry has to do a better job of telling its story. Tech is kind of cool when you're looking at new grads, and you hear a lot about tech. It's something we use. And you think about energy or oil or even gas, it's kind of this unknown. It may not be seen as fun or sexy or clean, but there are good paying jobs. The industry pays well. There's an opportunity for change. And actually, tech and energy there's lots of crossover that
Yeah.
can occur, is occurring.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking too. I was like, well, sometimes we use the word tech and I get what we mean by internet, but I mean, so many industrial companies, right, use technology in what they do. And it's so much advanced technology in the space to where we just don't know about it, right? We just don't know what's going on, what's
Correct.
happening. Like you said, being able to share the story, the industry, and what's going on, what's happening to get people interested is something that, from an energy perspective, I know is probably definitely needed, versus other industries in the space. And so, today we're talking about diversity and inclusion. We're talking about
Yes.
leadership and a lot around personal development for D&I
Mhm.
leaders. And so as we're going through and we're thinking about this, where I would like to kind of start is, look, as you've navigated through your career, not only in corporate, but then also on the consulting side, you've had a chance to see a lot of different leaders, some that were, very, very successful, some that weren't. And so my question is, when going through and looking at those leaders and looking at some of those traits, what do you see as like those key traits that make leaders successful within those organizations?
I'm glad you asked that question because leadership is key. And you may be, and a lot of people are chosen to sort of take on a leadership role, forced into a
Yeah.
leadership role, but with what training? And typically you're
Mm,
identified as a leader because of your technical or your functional expertise. So you may be a great engineer. That doesn't mean you'll be a great manager. Or so how it can be tough. I mean, I've been a leader myself, and having being one who coaches leaders is not always easy being a leader yourself. So I think learn a couple on the sort of key traits. being a leader, learning how to make that transition and getting the development you need, if it's not built into your sort of onboarding or training program, don't be afraid to ask for the help that you need, whether internally or externally, and maybe supplement both of them. Because what are some, you know, that leadership experience, leadership criteria. So make sure you know what it takes to be a good leader. And for within your organization, what does the organization value? How do they identify a leader? How do they identify a good leader? What are those competencies and leadership skills? So know that, and that will help you determine where do you start and what areas of help do you need to become a better leader. I think a second quality or trait is emotional intelligence. You can be, I may not be an engineer by trade, but that doesn't mean that I can't lead engineers, because realizing that I'm stepping out of the technical role and taking on a function, so being able to let go of that piece and being able to, when I say emotional intelligence, being able to kind of be curious, dig beyond the surface, and be able to look at your team and development, and just being, I guess I characterize it that sort of interpersonal intuitiveness.
Mm.
I think another trait is a good leader is not afraid to ask for help and development. And when you and say, I don't know when I don't know, because no one knows everything, even if you come from within that same function. And I think probably a fourth trait, and then I'll stop there, is a leader who continues or strives for continuous growth and wants to grow, kind of that may be the breadth, the kind of width and length, because it's not always fun being a leader. So, and probably one other thing I think, I figure out how do you add in some fun to it too?
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think that, I love the piece around emotional intelligence, because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times that's a big piece that's missing when it comes to leaders being able to be effective, right? Being able to make sure that they're connecting with their teams, making sure that they're able to understand themselves, right? And understand how they're showing up in the situations in which they're showing up is a key piece, right? To being able to not only impact the team, but then also lead, the organization. And it's another piece to that, there's a lot around, IQ, there's a lot around EQ, but there's one piece of this that I really, really love that doesn't get spoken about a lot is AQ,
Mm-hmm.
which is your
Okay,
adaptability quotient. And so that piece to
that's
me
important.
is something that, if you're able to adapt in a role, whether that be to each individual team, whether that be to the company
Mm-hmm.
that you're going into, however that may be, being able to adapt, I think, is one of the most critical traits that a leader needs to develop if they look to be successful moving forward, knowing that we're going to be in situations, environments that are going to be different, and we need to know how to adapt our skill sets in order to be successful in those different situations. And
I agree with you. Adaptability is absolutely critical. And I
mm,
think adaptability also makes you more valuable or more marketable if you happen to leave the company, or even within the company.
Yep, it does. And so let's say this. So to dig into that piece around the D&I leaders, right? And so I want to, we're talking about the position and kind of the work that they do, but I want to make sure that we define this so that we understand as we move forward. From your perspective, one, kind of what is the work of diversity and inclusion? Meaning, when a new D&I leader comes into an organization, what should they be focusing on as they enter into that new environment, that new company, so that they can get off on the right foot and really make impact from day one?
That is a great question, a loaded question, but a good question.
Let's
What is the
unpack
work?
it.
We'll come back to the work, but I'll start with a D&I leader, and there's you'll see different job titles: director of diversity, head of diversity, chief diversity officer. They're all leaders, and it might vary a little bit based on the level, but let's sort of say in general, let's talk about that director level, because I think that's where, in terms of the market, that's where a lot of the roles have been lately at the director level. So some of those we'll talk about that, and that could be a director with or without a team. It could be an individual contributor like a director. So that means it's just you leading, figuring out what to do for this organization from a D&I perspective. So, that's what the D&I leader, what is the work? What does that look like when you start? Some of your first clues on what the company thinks the work is. the first clues are come up from the job description. What is, and part of that, figuring that out and kind of marrying the two, what is the work that's been identified based on the job description compared to when you get the job? What's the reality of the work that's actually involved, and figuring out the delta between the two, if there is a delta. But I'd say in general, it's a very high level. A lot of times that work is, and we'll talk from the perspective in it, because just based on the market, there's been a lot of new roles. So coming from the perspective, let's say it's the first time the company has had a D&I leader. Congratulations, you've been selected. So what does some of that work looks like, or what might some of that work include? A lot of times the first place might be is coming up with a D&I strategy. And there is no one size fits all approach. And you want to make sure that that strategy aligns with the overall business strategy. So looking even function, where does that D&I role report to? Does it sit within HR? Does it report to a VP or CHRO? Does it report to the CEO? Does it report to some other part of the business? And that will give you an indication of the value that's been placed on a role, how far down in the organization it sits in terms of visibility, approval. What is it going to take to get that strategy approved? How many people do you sort of have to sell or convince, even though the role was posted and they said they wanted it? That's part of figuring out what the reality of it is. And so in there, talked about the strategy, but some of the other work is just that. Some of which may not always be covered in the job description is figuring out what's the reality of the nature or the state of the company's D&I journey and their evolution, their point of view on diversity and inclusion. What's the organizational culture? What's the real appetite? Is it reactive versus proactive? And what is it going to take? Because you're definitely going to have your own ideas. And what is it going to take to get a strategy implemented? So what do you, in order to even come up with a strategy, what information do you need? What, if you want to sort of gather information, is there an existing strategy? Is there data? What's the current business strategy? So those are some examples of what the work may look like. Can it be done with a one-person team? Yes, it can be, but it is really tough. And so to be able to meet expectations or match expectations or set realistic expectations, because I don't think you necessarily have to match the company's expectations, because it's a negotiation along the way. And you're one person, and you didn't get here overnight. You can't change the situation overnight. And so how do you also, I think part of that work going in, someone once told me that when I first started my consulting firm, soon as you, as a business owner, soon as you start a business, you should have your exit strategy planned and developed along the way. So, but I take that approach because I totally get it. Because as soon as you step into a role, you should also be working on and planning what is that next move. Basically, what's your exit strategy, whether that's a promotion or something else. And part of that work, I think, that needs to occur that a lot of people forget to do is that work for yourself. How do I sort of make this role work to my advantage? Is it something that I want to use as a stepping stone for promotion? Do I want more visibility? Whatever the reason or reasons are, how do you incorporate that into your strategy?
Oh, you kind of went into my next question, but I love it. So, so no worries. So, because we're talking about the D&I professional today, and I really want to use this as, there's a lot of people that's in these roles that are, new to the space. This may be their first role in D&I, and, they're just navigating based off of what they know, and they're kind of taking, a lot of the different things that come at them the best way they can. And so I want to make sure that, from a career perspective, that we're developing and we're understanding what does that mean for us individually in this space. Because for some, this may be kind of their chosen route. For others, right, it may not be their chosen route that they want to be in long term, I would say. And so when coming into a role, whether this is your first, whether you want to be in it long term or you want to be in it short term, how should D&I professionals, or what should they do to set themselves up so that they don't get pigeonholed to where now they're only getting sought after for D&I professional roles?
I think that's a great question, because it is maybe sometimes a little unspoken nuance that comes with the D&I role, that you may have HR professionals who sort of step away from HR. The perception is you step away from HR and you take on a D&I role and you want to go back, but sort of you're only seen as a D&I person, and what the sort of path has been to this point with corporate America, which could change but may not, is that a lot of times, D&I may be hot. It's the flavor of the month. It's super hot now. But when there's organization changes occur, or maybe they don't agree with the path you're going and we're changing directions, a lot of times you could potentially be one of the first people sort of repurposed or exited out the organization. Even if you have another skill, whether or not that view is taken. So I think, some things that whether you're new or seasoned D&I professional, that you can do to always keep yourself marketable, with whether you're D&I or not, but especially within D&I, is to make as a current D&I leader, make that role work for you. Have in mind, that entrepreneur mindset. Where do you want to take your career and your career development, and make sure you work in those opportunities. Definitely network internally and externally. I think that was probably one of my lessons learned when I had one of my D&I roles. Because it had much more of an external focus, which took me out of the company more than I had been. So I learned to network very well externally, and along the way forgot to network just as well internally. So I think that left me without some potential advocates. So I think sharing that lesson learned, that's something that D&I professionals can do. Make sure you're networking both internally and externally, so that you create advocates for yourself internally, but also some contacts and networks for yourself externally. So if you do find yourself wanting or needing another role, you have a good place to start.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I
oh, go
like it. I
ahead.
like it. No, no, I was just finna say that it's almost a lot of this too is in how you look at yourself. And I think
Yes,
that that's an important
absolutely.
piece as well, because if you come in and you look at yourself as the D&I leader, then you're going to think in that trajectory, right? And people are going to see you as that way, versus if you look at yourself and you kind of operate as if, no, I'm a business leader that works in diversity and inclusion, so that you understand and so that others understand that you have that broader skill set, right? So that when that time and that transition does come, it's not like, oh, that's the D&I person coming into this role. Like, no, that's a leader that's getting ready to transition into a new function or a new role in their career.
Yeah, the one little nuance there, I will agree with you that it's about you and how you think, and where you want to go, so that even if you do all that and you're still viewed as a D&I leader, you're still in control, and you sort of maximize your skill set and exercising your plan on where you want to go. So what if they don't see you as a business leader? You've networked, you've sort of broadened your horizons, and making that opportunity, and along the way gain other skill sets that are transferable. So how do you take the skills that you've gained and transfer them to other parts? So because maybe you've come, there's sometimes in a law firm or other situations, someone may have a legal background. That JD doesn't go away because you've stepped into a D&I role. It just, I firmly believe it just it just makes you that much more valuable and adds to your repertoire of skills. So it's really come to, how do you want to use your repertoire of skills, no matter how someone else sees you.
No, I love it. I love it. I love it. And so let me ask you, so as they're going into these roles, right, they're thinking about kind of their development, getting the exit strategy or understanding what they want to do in their career and kind of, where is this role going to take them? D&I is, top of mind for a lot of organizations. It's gotten a lot of publicity, and for the foreseeable future, we'll probably continue to get a lot of visibility, which means that as you're coming into those roles, all eyes are on you. Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to right the ship? Like, what's going to happen? What's going to be the improvements? And that can be a lot of weight for one individual to take on, right, with everyone looking at them. And so before you think about your next, step in career, what you have to do ultimately is be successful at the job that you're in. And so for those leaders to be successful in the role, what are some of the things that they can do, one, to gain influence quickly within the organizations, and then also make sure that they set the right expectations for the leadership team and the organization as far as the direction we're going to go?
Yeah, so a couple things to sort of win or gain some influence and impact and visibility pretty quickly is setting a strategy, but understanding what success looks like. Asking, what does success look like? Ask multiple times, multiple people, multiple contacts, because success is going to look different to different people, but also share what your vision of success looks like in the as a D&I leader, and work to come to some sort of agreement. Excuse me. And that's one way to gain that influence. Understand who the key players are within the organization, and who are the key stakeholders you need to gain approval from, influence, who's accountable, and make sure you keep them involved, communicated to, engage early and often. And probably even more so the people who may not be on. Try to understand where there may not be on board. Doesn't mean you need to agree. You may agree to disagree. But however, as a leader in an organization, here's your accountability. So make sure you sort of assign some accountability to the full leadership team. So I think those are some things that you can do to gain some influence. And if nothing else, another lesson learned is not a time to be shy. Learn to toot your own horn to say, here's the strategy, here's the work that was done, and here's what we've accomplished. But make sure you can carve out and identify what you specifically have done in that role, because you may or may not have advocates when you're not in the room. So you want to be able to articulate that and write it down so that it lives beyond you just having to say, well, here's what I've done. And look for the easy wins, and leverage those easy wins, and along the way figure out where you can get some champions to come along with you. So you kind of, you're building your sort of squad as you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, in the work that you do, as you see leaders navigate through this space, especially in the D&I, and you see them kind of go down this path, what are some of those, I guess, challenges or some of those pitfalls that you've seen D&I leaders face, so that those that are listening to this podcast can make sure that they're aware of some of those challenges and avoid them as at all possible opportunities?
I think a couple, and I think that's one of the interesting things. A lot of it has, people think is what other, so much has to do with other people, and so much of it has to do with yourself and how you go about. So a couple pitfalls: people have a strong interest and a strong passion. That strong interest and strong passion only takes you so far.
Only so far.
Um, Thinking of or an analogy comes to my mind, but I couldn't think of it. When they say love is not everything in a relationship, passion is not everything when it comes to D&I. So what's your mode to decompress for self-care? Because it is certainly, it takes a lot. It takes a toll on you. Are you in an organization or a culture where you're pushing a rock up the hill? And there may be some level of that across all D&I roles. So how do you sort of recalibrate, especially if you're one, and it's like me, where in some other prior experiences, I was the only one in the environment and in charge of D&I. So no, I didn't want to go out to dinner. No, I need to go listen to some R&B. I needed to do something that recharged me to sort of just have a moment. So I think, that's something that, D&I leaders can do is whatever it is to recharge you. Make sure you don't forget to recharge your battery, both personally and professionally, and speak up.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's tough when you're in the room and the subject matter is uncomfortable and people don't want to talk about race. And sometimes you may have to push the issue. So bring in other resources or professionals in the industry and share. You know what? Another good one is share storytelling and personal examples, whether they be that of you or your network, because that is the best sort of firsthand account to be able to share your perspective and get a point across with others who can't even fully understand, because that's not the environment they've been in or been exposed to. So those are a couple, key areas to sort of, how do you help figure it out?
Yeah, it's I guess the emotional piece one is the part that struck a chord with me, right? Because in a lot of cases, right, you're taking absorbing the emotions of others, right? Because
Yep,
everyone
the
has
emotion
a
and the
different
energy.
yeah, the energy, right? Everybody has a different feel about the topic,
Hmm.
whether it's, aggressive or, people that are really, think that, hey, this is not me or this is not, the world that we live in. All these different things can come to mind. And as that leader, you're listening and absorbing it. And then if you're not careful, you can start to take that with you in different spaces and different places to where, like you said, that negative energy is something to where passion is going to get clouded by that impact,
Yeah,
beat down by that negative energy to where you got to have a bigger cause, right? You got to have a bigger,
right.
what is in this for me? And think about the
Hmm.
ultimate goal. Like, what's the impact that I'm trying to make? And I think that's the piece to where we have to, get a little bit of understanding of, where have we come up until this point and where are we going? And then understanding for my role, what impact am I trying to make? Knowing that I'm only going to be in here for a short amount of time, but I want to leave the situation better than what it is that I received when I first started.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just your emotions and energy, it's other people's too. So even those that sort of staunch critic, trying to understand where they're coming from, even if you know you don't agree, and figuring out, at what point do you sort of say, okay, okay, we've understood, we've heard each other, but you have a job to do in strategy, and you just move forward because you're never going to get 100% of the people on board. I go with the 80-20 rule. If you have 80% of people, because it is in most cases a change. So from a change management perspective, you have 80% of the people on board, keep going. And you may not start with 80%. So work with the amount you have and keep going and work to sort of increase that number and gain champions along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, look, kind of a scenario question here. So, I'm a D&I
Okay.
leader. I'm continuing, down this path. I feel myself kind of, beating up against a lot of different walls. And I'm thinking to myself, it may or may not be time for me to leave or transition. And so, for professionals in this space, what are some of those signs that it may be time for them to one, either transition out of the company or transition out of this role so that they don't get to a point to where there's no return?
Right. That is a good question. I think it varies for each person, but I do think there are a couple sort of global indicators, and they probably actually apply even outside of D&I. A lot. How do you feel about what you're doing, or how you made to feel? How is your work perceived? Is it
Hmm.
like, oh, good job? Even if it's like, okay, good job. Overall, I didn't agree with this point. Or is the conversation more about, well, we really need to talk. We've had a discussion and we're not all on board. It's like, okay, this is happening more and more. And hopefully in that space you can still be curious without being defensive, but also being able to realize when you need to stand up for yourself to say, no, here's what we agreed upon, here's the direction that we're going. Now, I've kind of done what I needed to do. So if you feel like that you're being sort of singled out or picked on, or your work is being devalued, that those might be signs that it may be time to, take out the paper and start looking at that exit strategy and figure out what that exit strategy is. And talking about gaining network or internal networking, ask for feedback along the way, hopefully, in terms of the work you're doing, what's the sort of feedback to the work you're doing and how you're perceived. And that you can probably use that as a leading indicator, which hopefully would lead you wondering less about, uh-oh, and you may be able to sort of, because you want to be at the point where you can anticipate that I know I need to change, or you can anticipate the reaction that, yeah, they may not be down for this, and it may be time to make a move before
Yeah.
let me beat them to the punch. So being able to, and exercising that emotional intelligence to be able to read the environment. And sometimes it may not necessarily always be something internally. I am a proponent of always sort of keeping up the market. You may not be looking right now, but if you've updated your LinkedIn profile, someone likes your experience and wants to chat, what's the harm in chatting? Have the
Mm-hmm.
conversation, because that helps you better understand what your value is in the market. It's just in terms of pay, benefits, work quality as well.
No.
So I think those are a couple of things to be on the lookout for if you're wondering or questioning, like, when is it time to go, or is it
Yep.
time to go?
Yep. And I'll tell you this, as a owner of a recruitment firm, what's the harm
Uh-huh.
in listening?
Right.
look, look,
And see, that wasn't even planned. I played right into that.
there's no
Yeah. So,
harm.
I will say, though, being on the opposite end and you're talking with recruiters, it certainly helps if you give me a little bit of information about the role and the duties, even post a job description. Tell me what the pay is, because the market is right now, like we talked about, the market is hot for D&I professionals. So it's hard to talk to a recruiter and interview while you're working a full-time job, because
Yeah. It is. It
it just,
is. And you mentioned pay. Look, this is something to where, look, the work that you're going to be doing is not easy. It's not going to happen overnight. And so don't lowball yourself. Look, make sure that you are compensated equitably in all these situations, right? Because that's something to where it's great to take the job. You're excited. The passion is there.
mm-hmm.
But look, we got to talk money. We got to find out where the money resides in this situation.
And that's where, Cedric, you and your peers and colleagues come in for those D&I professionals. I mean, ask other D&I professionals, that you're close to, if you can talk dollar for dollar, if you can talk a range even. The pay varies greatly across industry. And when you're having those sort of casual conversations with recruiters and search firms, do not be afraid to ask about the total compensation package,
Yeah.
base, bonus, and if there's any equity.
Yep. Yep. No,
Because the work you pay, the work that you do, the salary you make probably still isn't going to feel like enough. But know about what the market is for your given geographic area. And it does
no,
vary by geography.
no, I agree. I agree. And that's something that I try to do, and my team tries to do every time, is that, look, we're in it for the candidate and we're trying to make sure that you get the
Mm-hmm.
best possible at the end of the day. And so, as we get closer right to the end, and people are listening, we talked about quite a few topics. If, those listening to the podcast could leave with 2 or 3 action items, whether it be D&I professionals or just general leaders, that can help them get their careers lined so that moving forward they're successful, what are 2 to 3 things that they can do after listening to this podcast to really go out and get on the right track?
2 or 3 things people can do. I think one is, and I know some people like books, some people like podcasts. I'm personally am not a big proponent of books. It's just a lot to read, but we've changed the way we absorb information. But one
Mm-hmm.
book, and even if you read the Cliff Notes, is your first 90 days, or this, I think it's called The First 90 Days. The premise basically is, in your first 90 days that you basically you spend your first couple weeks. Some people do it before they start their job, but have a plan for your first 90 days, an actionable plan, so that if the company doesn't already have an onboarding plan for you, or an onboarding plan or sort of training plan that you provide input to, you develop your own plan. And as a leader, you should have one anyway. Basically your leadership plan. What are you going to accomplish in the first 90 days? Because those are the most important days to sort of hit the ground running. So whether you read the book, Google first 90 days, there's lots of different books and approaches to how you work through those first 90 days that I think are great. Another kind of takeaway, if you want to kind of build your leadership competency and capability, because one thing I think people may not realize is that the D&I space, even in the last year, has changed drastically. And so even as a D&I professional and I say quasi expert, I do not know everything. There are times often that I need to ask questions, or I need further education and expertise. So I go out and get that, whether through organizations and associations, when you develop partnerships, a lot of the partnerships and I'll use LGBTQ as an example. 2 or 3 years it was LGBT, and then Q was added, then plus. And what does that even mean? And so working with QIA as an ally, what kind of does the terminology mean? How has the terminology changed? Maybe even what are some trends? So if you're either wanting to get into the D&I space or you're already there and you want to upskill, I think those are ways. Another way is kind of looking at those sort of partnerships and in organizations. So the first 90 days, partnership organizations and sort of upskilling or education. And maybe one more thing that to sort of take away, because D&I doesn't happen in a vacuum, and we all are human, we have lives outside of this. So I think in another way to potentially even make yourself a niche is look at the intersection of D&I and whatever other area it is that it's important to you. Is it finance? Or is it, talent management or development? Because D&I has an implication in a space in every single thing we do, whether it's an industry or function. And I think that's where a space where you can carve out a niche for yourself, also learn more, and some actionable, and probably maybe the biggest actionable thing you can do, kind of what's one or two areas of interest, and then look at those one or two areas of interest with the intersection or from a D&I lens.
I love it. I love it. Hopefully everybody wrote that down. If you didn't, rewind it and write it down. We'll link the first 90 days in the show notes. So don't worry if you can't find it. We'll find it for you. No excuses. And so
yes.
To cap off our discussion, I want to kind of change this a little bit here. What's been the biggest lesson you've learned in your career?
The biggest lesson overall that I've learned in my career. So we're talking the career. Doesn't matter what, kind of where you worked in that career. I always work and operate under the premise of I want to make myself a niche, so that if the market goes up, market goes down, company lays off, expands, I always can find a job or find the job that I want. Because when I say make myself a niche, how have I sort of expanded? So yeah, you may be in HR. So have you played in different spaces of HR? Worked in environments nobody else wanted to do? One of the reasons that I was originally attracted to manufacturing was, one, it paid well. Two, it's an environment, I'm not a big fan of kind of working in the corporate office environment. It's very kind of like boring and regimented. Manufacturing, like, we just need some help. It's all hands on deck. You get experience a lot quicker without the sort of red tape. You get pretty immediate feedback. So you know if you're doing well or not well. So, look for those sort of unique or unusual spaces where there's not a lot of you there, whether it's not a lot of you because of your gender, your race, your experience, your age, and spend some time in those spaces, in those parts of the company. And I think that's the biggest lesson I have learned, which has served me well and certainly gotten me to this point, and a sort of operating principle that I still practice to this day.
Awesome. I love it. Well, look, this has been an amazing conversation. Before we go, do you have any parting words, any shout outs? And then where can people find and connect with you if they want to kind of learn more and go deeper in the discussion with you?
Oh, good. So, parting words, I guess. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. It's been a joy. I always love talking D&I, but more importantly, I guess probably as it relates to parting words, don't be afraid to be the master of your own career and your own development. If nothing else, those are my greatest parting words, because a lot of times, those diverse candidates, and in particular Black candidates, we are the most undervalued in the market, and a lot of times we may undervalue ourselves, but we are. And especially I would say, kind of like the Gen Xers and millennials now, you have the skill sets that the companies need and want, because those ahead of you are now beginning to retire. So you're more marketable than you know. You just need to learn your value. So I think those would be my parting words. And where people can find me is at my website at hollandenergy.com, or on LinkedIn via Holland Energy or Heather Holland as well.
Awesome. Well, that does it for us. Look, thank you everyone for joining us on another episode of 3D Podcast. I'm Cedric, and you've been listening to Heather Holland, Global D&I Leader for Holland Energy Consulting.
Yes.
See you later.
Well, thank you, Cedric. Enjoy, everyone.
Thank you very much.